Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by learning to develop yourself, your skills, your network, and more. I'm Brian, your host. All right, I've seen a lot of really bad JavaScript code out there. There's nothing wrong with that. In order to be good, you have to start somewhere, and that place is going to be writing really bad JavaScript. But how do you know what bad is, and how do you know what good is? I want to give you a few very, very practical tips in this super short episode that are going to improve your JavaScript. Really simple stuff that are telltale signs of a junior developer or somebody that graduated a boot camp that wasn't Parsity, by the way. These are things that I noticed over the years from reviewing lots of code as an engineering manager, hiring people, interviewing people. People send me code all the time and say, hey, what can I do to improve this? And I want to share a few really simple things that I think will help out the majority of very early career JavaScript developers. Number one, the biggest red flag and perhaps the most telltale sign that somebody is a super junior developer, the code is not formatted. Super simple thing to fix, right? But you'd be shocked when you get code and like one line has 2 indentations, the next line has 3. Some lines are written like a big block of text. It's just like no rhyme or reason to how anything is formatted. And I'm like, nowadays with Visual Studio Code and the extensions that they offer, like Prettier, you can just literally save a file and it will auto format. Now, in order for you to do that, you, need to have Visual Studio Code. I'm not going to go over why you should be having Visual Studio Code. Well, fine, I will. Because 75% of professional developers use Visual Studio Code. The overwhelming majority of us use it. So just use it, right? Why make your life harder? If you want to go out and learn Vim, or you want to go out and learn something really cool with some other editor, for sure add that to your tool belt. But when you're starting off, just use the easiest tool that will help you integrate with your team and help you understand what other people are using so you can work effectively in a team. Also, the really cool libraries and extensions that come with it for free are going to save your life. So this extension, Prettier, Prettier, is a free extension. You install it, look up how to auto format on save. Once you do that, every time you save, your JavaScript and your HTML code and your CSS will look prettier. Get it? Ha. Next thing. So when you're learning how to declare variables in JavaScript, you might learn var. Like we still teach var at Parsity, and people might think, well, why would you teach that? We kind of like to go at a first principles approach to learning how to code in many ways. Like whatever you name your variables is unimportant. The idea of naming variables is important. Does that make some sense, right? Like the actual act of declaring a variable is something that you'll do across programming languages. In Python, you don't have any declaration. You just say a equals cat or whatever. In JavaScript, you could have var a equals cat, or let a equals cat, or const a equals cat. This is where things get a bit confusing for JavaScript developers. So we start with var, and then we introduce let and const. And depending on where you learn JavaScript or when you learned it or how you learned it, you may be using these things interchangeably. Do not do that. They each have very specific use cases, and we go over all these within Parsity for that very reason, because we know that they each have a very specific use. And anybody saying you don't need to learn var anymore, I would challenge that it's a good thing to know, because a lot of the code bases that you're going to encounter will still use var. But let me make your life a lot simpler, right? Once you learn var, once you learn let, and once you learn const, your code base should be 90+% using const. In fact, you should always default for using const and only use let if your code gives you an error that you shouldn't be using const. Why is this? Because it's very rare that you want to redeclare a variable. Imagine this scenario. You declare a variable Bob. You say let Bob equals Bob, right? Like a string Bob. Okay, cool. Why on earth would you want to redeclare? Why would you want to reassign that variable to be something else later? That could be really confusing for other developers if they're reading it. You say, let Bob equals Bob. And then 100 lines down the page later, 100 lines down the file, you say, Bob equals Sally. Why would you ever do that? Why wouldn't you just say const Bob equals Bob It lets people know, hey, this will not be reassigned. I'm not going to take the same variable and then put another value inside that variable. That would be a little bit silly, wouldn't it? That can cause all sorts of problems. Sometimes you really do want to redeclare a variable. And of course, you should use let. But in general, just use const. Now I'm going to get into some lesser known, more advanced things that you could do. When you're writing functions in JavaScript and you have maybe 2 arguments or 3 arguments, okay, not such a big deal. When you have 5, 6, 7, 8 arguments, you need to rethink, one, how can I break this up into making it more modular? Can I break this up into multiple functions? If you really can't, I want you to use this trick. Use an object for your function arguments. This will make it so that they don't have to be in the same order when you pass them in. If you use an object where the keys of that object are the names of the arguments that you want to pass in, it's going to make your life and other developers' lives so much easier. Because once you have more than 4 arguments and they depend on the order in which you pass them in, let's say the first argument is a string, the second argument is a number, the third argument is another number or something like that. If you get these things out of order, it could ruin the function and it would be really hard to trace the bug because it won't yell at you. It won't say, hey, you passed in a number where it should be a string unless you're using something like TypeScript. So instead, use an object. That way you can pass them in any order. This way you're basically naming your arguments using the object, and it'll make it basically impossible for anybody to mess up the order of the arguments. Here's another feature which I see underutilized, especially among newer JavaScript developers. It's called optional chaining. Have you ever had some code that wanted to look in a deeply nested object, an object with a ton of layers, and you're going through there and you're saying user.profile.name.lastname. Whatever. You're going very far down an object, and the chances are at any point, if you messed up and it tries to go further, it's going to throw an error, right? It's going to throw an error and break your program, and your program will stop executing. So in order to safely traverse a large object, if you're going more than 2 layers deep in an object, I would use optional chaining. It's really simple. It's question mark dot and then the name of the property. So for example, it might be user question mark dot profile question mark dot name question mark dot first name. Basically what this does is it says, hey, is that next property there? Okay, cool. Let's keep going. And then it goes to the next one. It says, hey, is that property there? Cool. Let's keep going. If it comes against a property that is not there, then it short circuits. It just returns undefined instead of breaking your program. Super, super helpful. In fact, at the last company I was at, I introduced this change because we had this logic that would look deep into these objects. And if something wasn't there or it couldn't find it, it would just break the program and it would break in production, giving users a really, really bad experience. So optional chaining was a quick fix that saved us from this error. And lastly, pick a style. Just pick a style of writing code. When you write code, it should read like a book, right? It should read like it was written by the same person, the same author. So if you're using var, just use it everywhere. If you're using const mostly, use it everywhere. If you have functions written like function, use that everywhere. If you have functions written like const, my function equals, use that everywhere. It's important to have cohesion in a code base. People don't take this seriously enough. But when you read a book, your brain expects to find patterns in that book. If you read a book that was written by 4 different authors, each using a completely different style, 1, you wouldn't enjoy reading it. 2, it would be a bit confusing. And 3, you'd probably have a negative opinion of the overall book, right? Even if it was written well, even if each piece was individually written pretty well, it wouldn't flow. And so you'd walk away feeling dissatisfied. And same thing happens in code bases. It not only is not appealing to read, which is less of an issue, the major issue is that if more people work on it, how do they know which style to adopt? So let's say you bring in a new coworker, a new member joins the team, and they want to write code in the code base, and they see that there are functions written 4 different ways. Some files are formatted, some are not. Some use var, some use let, some use const. What do? Now they have the additional overload of figuring out, well, which is the right style? Then they have to ask people. It takes more time. And you scale this out and it does not scale. You have something that is really, really difficult to work in and makes a new person afraid to make a decision. And you might think that's hyperbole or no, that's ridiculous. I've worked in a ton of code bases and I've also mentored a lot of people and I've got to look at a lot of code bases, which is a really cool thing to do. It made me realize how much code out there is very similar and how many of these mistakes are being made at companies that you wouldn't expect. So doing these things not only makes you look better as a developer if you do plan on sharing your code, because I know everybody's so obsessed with their GitHub and sharing it. And I honestly think that most people shouldn't share their GitHub because we're all critics as developers, right? So if you share your GitHub with me, for example, and I just pick randomly something out of that GitHub and it looks like trash, it's not going to leave me with a good opinion of you. It's one of the reasons I don't like to share my GitHub. And if I do, I'm sharing a very specific project with the person. I don't want to have them just get access to all my GitHub repos. Because what could they really learn from that? Some of these are my side projects. Some of these are throwaway projects. Some of these things I made for Parsity or my other program that I have. So I don't necessarily want people looking at that and judging me based on it. But if I was going to show somebody something, it would be formatted. It would be using all the techniques that I just shared with you. And it would have some documentation to let people know what it is I'm doing and how to run that program locally on their machine. So those are the tips and tricks that I hope really help you out. If you're anything like most of the new JavaScript developers I've seen, or anything like me when I first started writing JavaScript. By the way, I like doing more technical deep dives on certain episodes, but talking about technical stuff is not always the best medium for this kind of thing. If there is something you think I should be talking about on a technical level, I'd love to hear about it. And if I do, I'll shout you out on the episode. Hope that's helpful. See you next week. That'll do it for today's episode of the Develop Yourself podcast. If you're serious about switching careers and becoming a software developer and building complex software and want to work directly with me and my team, go to Parsity.io. And if you want more information, feel free to schedule a chat by just clicking the link in the show notes. See you next week.